Ladies and gentlemen, David Morehouse.
Can everybody hear me this time? Good. Well, I really appreciate Bob and Terry asking me to come back and to talk about this. And before I begin, or I guess as a beginning, I just should say that I have a couple of points that I need to clarify because I've been beaten up a couple of times. You know, I had a guy, somebody called me at 3 o'clock in the morning yesterday in the room, and he said, it was a guy, and he says, you don't know me. I said, no, I probably don't. Not if you call me at 3 a.m. I don't. He said, I just have one question. I said, I hope it's, what do you like in your coffee? You know? He said, you know, what do you mean you're not a part of this tribe? So, I'm going to explain myself. Because what I meant by that is it's not an elitist attitude. Because I could not be more humbled than I am standing before you. I have never seen or experienced such a sense of family as I've experienced here. And I just, there's so much love going around in this place. And there needs to be more for you. And I'm just grateful for it. And I guess, you know, all right, I'm part of this tribe now, you know. Maybe you don't want me, but that's always a possibility too. But what I really meant by that was just to say that, you remember what I started talking about, recognizing that you're truth seekers, and that was my great respect and admiration for you, was that you were truth seekers. And I understood that. I knew that. I've always known that. And that's what I've always respected and appreciated about you. And then I talked to you about the reverence of truth, and I talked to you about the eagerness of truth and the pursuits of truth. And I talked to you about truth being kind of the aristocracy of spiritualism. And that's a whole other lecture talking about that kind of stuff, but it is essential that we all understand that. And it's essential that we all understand, I think, that that as we pursue truth, as we are here in this UFO Congress, and as you do it out in all of your research and studies and everything else that you're doing, and all the hard work and dedication that you're putting forth, and sitting and listening to speakers and watching films and other things, trying to codify all of these things in your life, it's important that you understand the reverence of the truth as well. And that goes back to what I said to you about being careful about who you see, you know, asking the questions about who's talking to you and what they're talking to you about, and what their credentials are, where they come from, what they mean, what are they asking, why are they asking it, why are they telling you these things. And you have to ask those questions for yourself. Because there are a great number of deceivers out there, a great number of deceivers. And many of them come in wearing badges and carrying credentials, and most of them come from some deep, dark past in the intelligence community, and they're willing to take you to lunch and then empty your knapsack. You know, you people are, you know, you are a very valuable and rare asset because you are truth seekers. You know, the rest of the population out there accepts the legions of the status quo, and you don't. And that makes you unique, and that also makes you a target. That makes you a target, and that makes you a place, when you gather like this, that there are elements of the intelligence community that will come around, and they want to come around because they want to know who's saying what, who knows what, who's here, you know, what are they throwing up, what kind of information have they gathered. They want to know those things, and you have to be wary of that and cautious of that. And that is letting go of this eagerness of the truth and attacking or attaching yourself to this reverence. There must be both. There must be both. And that's a mythology that you have to define for yourself. And that was my concern in coming here, was that I didn't really know that you did that. And now I know that you do. I know that you do. Do it more. Do it more. The other thing is that I want to take questions tonight when I get through this thing that I'm going to talk about. But I'd ask you not to ask me to contradict or to address the points of anybody else that's talked about remote viewing or anything else, because I spent a big part of my life being very judgmental of people and being very cruel to people. And I've spent this part of my life now, not being that way, or trying every morning not to be that way. I try to live every day of my life to not criticize, condemn, or complain. Boy, that's hard. And to have no judgment. And I don't want to stand up and refute or banter about or address questions about former colleagues and that kind of stuff. So spare me that, please, because I won't do it. Everybody has their take. Everybody has their version, and you have to respect that, just as I do, or try all of us to respect it. And I guess my hope for you is that, because I don't know that I'll ever be asked back, but if I am, my hope is that we evolve as a family, and that we learn more love as a family and more respect as a family for those that make the sacrifices, and all those other speakers that stood up here and did the things that they do and take the risks that they take, and you folks and spending the money you spend and taking the time that you take to come here and do these things. And I just hope that this sense of family just grows more and more as the years go on, because it's what's going to hold you together, and it's what's going to solidify you as you stand against the legions of the status quo. It was what will make you strong, what will give you your strength, and keep you protected from them. If you start spinning off into little segments and little, argumentative groups that try to attack what one person says, vice what another person says, then you're doing, and they will attempt, they being, you know who they are, they will attempt to make that happen, because that fragments you. If they can fragment you, then they break you down, and they destroy this core of family that is out here, that is this great strength, in this great pool of truth seekers that will eventually win out. And that I'm convinced you will eventually win out. But don't short yourselves by allowing them to fragment you with different ideas and concepts and, trying to attack one versus the other. You be your own counsels and look behind the eyes of those who speak to you and make your decisions. And I guess that's the great love that I have for you. That's the great message I have for you. Live your life each day. Not that I should be lecturing to you, and please don't understand that. I mean, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to tell you what I've discovered as a remote viewer, as a traveler, what I've discovered. And it's meant a lot to me. It's changed my life. I spent a good part of my life covered in blood. And it's different now for me. I look at the world in a different way. And I look at the world in a more trusting way, and a more understanding way, and understanding not because I'm a brilliant guy, because I'm not, but because I opened my heart to stepping into a four-dimensional world, into the world of the Creator, and came back with a knowledge and a wisdom that I now try to impart to you, which says, be in love, watch the world, read constantly, okay? Keep the company of good people like yourselves. Keep silent. Look at good art, read, listen to good music. But most importantly, be in love. And be in love with yourself, and be in love with one another. And you will be such a strong and powerful force that this, all the evil that is out there, wherever it manifests itself, will never topple you. And you will always stand like a beacon to the rest of the world. And that's what you are right now. And you have to understand that. You are a beacon to the rest of the world. There are people that think you're quirky and odd, but there are also people that step back and look at you as heroes. And that's how I saw you. And frankly, I was just afraid to come here because I didn't know that I could measure up in that respect, because I didn't know that I had a message to share. And that's why I said I'm not of your tribe. And if you'll have me, now I'm honored to be a part of your tribe. I really am. Thank you. Enough of that schmaltzy stuff. Do you guys know why President Clinton wears boxer shorts? Keeps his ankles warm. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about something pretty ugly and disappointing, and then we'll talk about something kind of neat if we can. I wanted to talk to you about a project that I was involved in some years ago after the tragic downing of TWA Flight 800. And Janet Reno, of course, came forward with this wonderful statement that said, you know, we may never know really what brought this aircraft down, which was kind of a prelude to the inevitable reality that there would never be a decision made or a call made on exactly what brought this aircraft down. So the idea is, as you'll find out as I talk to you about this, the idea is and was that there will never be a definite statement made about what brought it down. There will be a great deal of speculation made by members of the NTSB, or NTSC, but there will never be, it's B, isn't it? Thanks. But there will never be a decision made, and I'll tell you why. Shortly after the crash came down, CBS reports and a young two-time Emmy Award-winning producer by the name of Christina Borgeson approached me and RVT, Remote Viewing Technologies, and said, hey, know you guys are working, doing stuff, teaching police officers. Was hoping that maybe you'd help and get involved in this investigation for TWA Flight 800. Well, you know, that sounded pretty sexy. Thought, yeah, that would be good to get involved in that, and we could do something with that. But the big concern was, how am I going to pull this together? Because I know this is going to be a controversial thing. And how am I going to pull together, and what am I going to use for it? What kind of remote viewers am I going to use for it? And, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And how am I going to make the model work to do this? So it was with CBS Reports. And Christina had earned an Emmy for her story on Castro, and she had earned an Emmy for her story on the migrant workers in California. Smart girl, knew her job very, very well about doing this investigation. So remember I told you about the rules that remote viewing is never a standalone endeavor, you know, going in reverse, and that you never trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of others. Therefore, you cannot task yourself unless it's just going to be experiential in nature, and that it's not 100% accurate. Never has been. Not going to be. And that viewers cycle. Viewers, some do well, some do badly. I mean, we go up and we go down. So nobody's ever consistently performing at one statistical level, you know, one level of accuracy. It always goes up and down. So this was the team that we had for the TWA flight investigation. We had 60 police officers, detectives, that we had trained. We at that point had trained about 200 and some odd, and we pulled in 60 of them. Now I pulled in 60 of them for one reason, because I knew that there were going to be a number of them at any given time that were not going to be doing well because of job stress or whatever it might be, that their results, their data, was going to be skewed and down low because of physical inclemencies or emotional inclemencies or other things. So we started with a database, or a pool rather, of 60 remote viewers. They were all stage 6 remote viewers. That means they had been through 2 phases of training. They had been through all stages. Stages 1, which deals with the ideogram and the decoding of the ideogram into its basic components, the A, B, and C component, which the A component is just retracing the motion of it, and the B component is capturing whether or not, by probing it, it is natural or man-made. And then the C component is identifying whether or not it is land or land-water interface or a mountain or structure or a person. And then you go from there into stage 2s, and stage 2s involve sensory perception of the target. It means widening the aperture in this very gauged, controlled manner with this very disciplined, protocol of remote viewing, of coordinate remote viewing. So you're now sensing tastes and textures and smells and temperatures and colors and sounds and dimensionals, verticals, horizontals, diagonals, mass and density, and energetics. What's going on in those areas? That's all stage 2s. And then they develop sketches, which are basic geometric patterns and capturing textures visually, capturing the architecture or the dimensionals of this particular target site in snapshots, like having someone take you, put you in the center of a place, and move you around and let you take snapshots. Open your eyes and tell you to close them, and open them and close them, and open them and close them. And that's how the remote viewer sees in stage 3. And then moving into stage 4, where you now develop a matrix, and the matrix is an extension of stage 2s. And you bifurcate stage 2s now and take the dimensionals out as a separate category. And you probe the dimensional area to try to capture those things. You work on aesthetic impact relevant to the site, emotional impact relevant to the site and relevant to the viewer. You work on tangibles and intangibles, capturing those, an analytical overlay signal. And then moving from there into stage 4.5, and then into stage 5. Stage 5 is where you take some intangible concepts or analytical overlay signal, which is matching imagination data, and you take that and break it out into emanations. And you work on objects, emanations, attributes, emanations, subjects, emanations, and topics, emanations. Now, all of this means nothing to you right now, and you should understand that this is hours and hours of lecture. I mean, at this point, you are about 50 hours into the course. 50 hours into the course learning this, and about 10 targets under your belt at this point. And then you move from stage 5s into stage 6, which is a 70 hours to get to stage 6. And in stage 6, you build another matrix, which is the same as the stage 4 matrix, but now you develop sketches that are overlay sketches, which are now assembling all those pieces of data that you captured out there and putting them into very detailed sketches that are called renderings. And some remote viewers are exceptionally good at that, this visual aspect of it, and pulling it together. And their targeting data is uncanny in what they're able to capture. And then others, not so good, you know. Kind of looks like a rat's nest there as they try to draw, but it means something to them. But they are very good at the verbal aspects of it. You know, there are some interesting things. Look, just as an aside, looking back at the remote viewing community, is that in the unit that I was in, which was only one of several units, remember I told you that the intel community, despite what they'll stand up and tell you, and by gosh, they will stand up and tell you, they will say, no, there were no other units. That's bull. Okay? It's not true. There were lots of other units. They never put all their eggs in one basket. Sure, there were lots of other units, lots of other viewers, and lots of other missions that they were working them on. My unit was just one little old unit with 7 people in it at the time I was there. 7 remote viewers and a secretary. That's what it was. So, but in that unit, everybody developed their own little talents, you know. Everybody was good at one thing and not so good at others. Some people could see people and see inside people very well with uncanny accuracy. And others couldn't do it on their best day. Some people could not see weapons. Is that amazing? Because of the spiritual nature of this entire process, because of what they learned, the wisdom that they gained, something in their psyche precluded them from being able to see instruments of death and destruction. And so when asked to look at like a weapons museum, like a Civil War museum, they would draw empty cases and never put a weapon in it. And others would capture just the weapon and never capture the case. Some would capture the essence of all of the people that had moved through the target and see none of the structure. So that's why every remote viewer sees the target from a different perspective with a different interpretive value. And that's why you never trust the results of a single remote viewer operating independently of others. You always have a collective effort because it puts different sets of eyes, non-physical eyes, mind you, but different sets of eyes in the target area to look at what you're going to see. So that's why we started with 60 police officers, spread out across the United States. Now, I also knew in my gut that this 800 thing was controversial and that something was wrong from the beginning. And because of that, we spread the effort out so that nobody could ever go and get just one person or two people or 5 people or 6 people and take everything that they had by raiding their house and, and emptying out everything that they had captured or gleaned during the remote viewing process. So what we tried to do is protect ourselves by diversifying the effort and spreading it out across the country. So it would have taken one hell of a person to be able to pull it all together and find where all 60 of them were and take all 60 pieces of data. And, as a further backup, all of the data was cross-leveled. You know what I mean by that? Every time there was a remote viewing session done, everybody got a copy of it. Okay? So it's tough to go find them and burn them all because there's 60 of them. And then they all made copies of them. And when we completed the final report, it went to all 60 of them. Even though some of them only did 1 or 2 sessions, it went to all 60 of them. So there was a great deal of data that was spread all over the place. Now, let's set the stage for TWA Flight 800, exactly what was taking place on that day. Well, you'll remember that the first thing that happened after the aircraft went down is you had a bunch of people that started talking about seeing something flying up from out of the water, right? You had a C-130 pilot for the Air Force that said that. Did you ever hear from him again? The answer is no, you didn't. You want to know why? No, he didn't lie. Was he alive? Oh, yeah, he's alive. They're all alive. The issue is, after I'm going to jump ahead and just say to you, after we did all of this, we did a video, CNBC. It was on CNBC. It was called Not the Usual Suspects. And a bunch of writer colleagues of mine, authors, that did true crime stuff. And then there was me, and there were a bunch of Pierre Salinger was there. And we did this thing, and it's the same guy that's always on CNBC, that blonde guy with the wire rim glasses, He did the thing. He was the host of it. And everybody, to a man and a woman on this thing said, well, you just couldn't cover something like that up. Excuse me? When you drag some guy over that says, this military structure has a protocol. It's called a public affairs officer. Anybody out here ever been a public affairs officer? Good. Then no? Yes? No? Good. I can talk about them then. Public affairs officers are not normally, the sharpest knife in the drawer, right? They usually pick the guy or the girl that, didn't do so well in the other area or was a little weak in command or something else, and they say, come here. You're now going to be responsible for talking to the press about whatever happens on this installation or whatever happens out here pertaining to anything affiliated to us. And listen, you will only say what we tell you to say. Is that clear? And the guy or the girl, not being the sharpest knife in the drawer, at that point being a little bit worried about their career, goes, uh-huh. Got it. So when that C-130 pilot gets back on the ground and runs over and talks to the press and says, I saw something come up out of the water, I guarantee you that it was only a matter of hours before somebody with a very serious face in his chain of command grabbed him by the stacking swivel, as we used to say in the military, and brought him over and said, if you open your mouth one more time, we will court-martial you and send you to Leavenworth. Do you understand me? Now, it's a young captain, has a career, has a family. Is what he says going to bring back 234 people? No. Does he want that paycheck at the end of the month? Right. Does he have a wife that's saying, you better shut up? Yes, probably. So he shuts up. And it kind of goads him, and it's grating on him for the rest of his life because he saw something, And you know, when he's out of the military sometime, if he's brave enough, he'll turn around and he'll talk about it. But he's not going to talk about it then. And the same is true of anybody else anywhere in this program. And these are things that are compartmentalized. This thing that happened is a compartmentalized project. So there aren't that many people that know about it. Now, there are people in a test facility that when a test goes wrong, there is a procedure that they follow. It's empty your pockets, take everything you have when the procedure goes wrong, when some test fails, and dump it all and step back. Because then they have a damage control team that comes in and picks it all up, and then they bring you in and they debrief you one-on-one where they issue the threat, and then they brief you collectively where they issue the threat. Now, if you're somebody working for a defense contractor somewhere, making the money that you make, building the system that you build, and something goes wrong, the issue or the question that you ask yourself again is there anything I can say or do that's going to bring back 234 people? No. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to destroy the company. I'm going to destroy myself, my life, my job, and so should I step forward to tell the truth? And the answer that they will have is no inside themselves for the most part. Or what they'll do is they'll say, I'll wait till an appropriate time and then I'll say it, 10 years, 20 years after the heat wears off. Now, remember what I told you about no judgment. Do you have judgment over somebody like that? No, can't, don't. It's a scary world out there. And to lose everything and not be able to bring life back is almost pointless to a certain extent. Now, not to people like you or me because we're truth seekers, but to other people out there, it's a scary thing to them to end their careers when they know it changes nothing in their opinion. So, to end your career on an issue of principle is something that only you can decide for yourself. And most will not do it. So here's the stage now set for Flight 800. If I can find the slide. I got it. Well, that's clear, huh? Okay. That's my fountain pen, not my pointer. There's my pointer. Can everybody not see that very well? This is Long Island, okay? New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. Right here, Brookhaven National Labs. Right here, JFK Airport. Right out here, there are actually about 7 military operational areas. Any pilots in here? Must be pilots in here. Lots of pilots in here. MOAs on every sectional. It has a frequency on it. You're supposed to call the frequency and say, look, I'm flying whatever kind of aircraft you are, and you're asking permission to traverse those, to fly over the top of them. And if they are active, you can't do it, and you'll have to be vectored around or not approach them at all because there are invisible hazards there. And those hazards can be missiles or gunfire or other fast-moving aircraft. It can be a whole myriad of things. But those MOAs are there, and they are marked, and you cannot cross them unless you have permission to do it. Now, there are about 6 or 7, and I apologize because I don't have the sectional chart with me because I haven't talked about this for about a year and a half. There are about 7 of them out there in the water. And they're about 25 miles off the coast. And they're used for all sorts of things. Now, Brookhaven National Labs right here, that's big Nikola Tesla's big hangout. And it's also, according to the governor of New York, the reason why New York has, or that particular area of New York around in Long Island has the largest incidence of cancer of any place else in the nation. There's a big concern there about what's going on, and they're trying to shut down a lot of what Brookhaven does. They have a particle accelerator there and some other things. And there's also been some stories about UFOs and other things being fired at and brought down there. So this story I'm going to tell you may lend some credibility to that for you. There's also what on the northeast side of Brookhaven, a top-secret naval weapons test facility. Now, it's one of these airports that it's a naval air base, when you drive by it and look at it, there's nobody home during the daylight. And there are no aircraft parked out on the tarmac. There's a flag flying and cars in the parking lot, but there's no aircraft on the tarmac. When the lights go out, the big heat tab in the sky goes down, then all of a sudden doors open and things come out and fly. So, does anybody know what Plum Island is? That's a neat place. I mean, you know, you can pay like millions for houses in the Hamptons here. Plum Island is a biological test facility where we test biological agents on animals. You can side stroke to it. It's not very far. I mean, you can see when you look at the map much more closely, it's not very far at all. It has a ferry that goes to it. But that's what it is. In fact, there was just a novel written about it. It's fictionalized to protect the author, but there is a novel written about it. You should grab it and take a look. Plum Island. He was creative. Now, so that's the setting. And then you got JFK Airport down here. So kind of a strange setup in here. Now, here's what happened next. This is all just the investigative part, and then I'll tell you the remote viewing part in a moment. The investigation that we worked on concluded the following pieces. These MOAs that were here, of which there were 6 or 7 of them, 4 of them were joined together by the Navy. And I read the message. I actually held it and read it. And remember, I don't lie to you, okay? That message, I read it. It was a message from the Department of the Navy that said to JFK, the FAA at JFK, it said, we will be conducting an exercise during these hours, from this hour to this hour. And it started about 4 hours before Flight 800 was scheduled to take off, and it extended several hours past the time that Flight 800 would have passed out of the area, would have flown out of the area. But 4 of those MOAs were now joined together. And they were in an area that was now, according to the message, codenamed Tango Billy. So they joined 4 together and codenamed them all as one big giant MOA, Tango Billy. And the reason they notified the FAA is because whenever any of those MOAs are active, the FAA establishes a safe corridor. Now, that's kind of an operative word, a safe corridor, codenamed Betty. And I personally interviewed at least 14 pilots, 7 of which were TWA pilots, some who tearfully recalled their friends who were killed in this 747-200, had all said, yep, flown Betty many times. Anytime those MOAs are active, Betty is established. And what happens is an aircraft comes out of JFK, spirals up to an altitude, hits a VOR here in Jersey, flies an outbound radial, this is radio navigation now, picks up an inbound radio at the Nantucket VOR. Flight following comes out of Boston by the big radar screen in the sky watching all of this. And then when they hit that VOR, they break off and head for Europe. And aircraft cross and they're stacked, but think of it as like a pipe in the sky that they're flying in. It's a corridor. Now, the other part of that message said, you see that red circle? The other part of the message said to the FAA, there will be a P-3 Orion flying during this time and this time, during the time that this MOA was active. And this Orion was going to be flying and providing observation from the surface to flight level 10,000, so 10,000 feet above the sky, or 10,000 feet up. Don't you have to ask yourself at this point, remember the Navy said there were no exercises going on. Nothing was happening out there. Well, what was it looking at? What kind of observation was it providing from the surface to flight level 10,000? And it also stated that there would be 2 other aircraft circling Tango Billy. They were 2 UH-60 aircraft. That's all it specified. And that was how the stage was set at that time. Now, some additional information that was provided by personnel that remained anonymous but were in official capacities that said things like, we know that there were 29 sonar buoys in Tango Billy. Sonar buoys in the water in Tango Billy. And that what was inside those 2 black UH-60 Black Hawk aircraft were SEALs, Navy SEALs, all outfitted with dive gear on. And Flight 800 was over here turning and burning on the tarmac, loading up passengers, getting ready to take off. Now, one other player moved into position, the USS Normandy. You've all heard about it, an Aegis-class missile cruiser. Now, the Department of the Navy said it was 185 nautical miles away. What difference does that make? The missile flies well over 500 miles. The kind of missile that was involved in this flies well over 500 miles. I mean, you know that. We just shot 600 of them at Saddam at a cost of anywhere from $750,000 to $1.25 million apiece. Don't say war is not economics. So, this thing now is in position. Satellite imagery that we purchased from the French with CBS indicated that the Normandy was 35 nautical miles away, not 185 nautical miles. So, another lie. Another lie. Oops. Sorry, I have to look at the top of my head there. Okay. Here was how a missile played a role. And then I'll tell you what remote viewers were doing. At this time, remember we were calibrating remote viewers. We were tracking their validity levels. We were running them on what are called calibration targets, training targets, targets that we had quantifiable attributes for each target, 10 quantifiable attributes for each target. They would pick up all different kinds of aspects, sensory aspects and pieces of data about the target. But for every target we ran the police officers on, there were 10 pieces of critical information relevant to that gestalt that they had to bring back. And as we evaluated those, we gave them a numerical rating or percentage rating. You're 50%, you're 60%, you're 30%. You bottomed out, you zeroed out, you were off target, you got nothing. And it keeps going that way, tracking them. And we were compiling the database all the time that this investigation was going on, and we were finding out where all the players and what all the pieces and parts were. We knew that Flight 800 went into the water right roughly at this point, okay? 10 miles off the coast. 10 miles off the coast. Now, already that I ran my pointer around there, you ought to be looking at something. Brookhaven, MOA. Brookhaven, MOA. Brookhaven, MOA. And Flight 800 went down into the water right there. Actually about right there. Now, we actually began working reverse trajectories, trying to calculate. We were trying to get from the black box, is what we asked them, what the airspeed was, what the angle of ascent, or what the rate of climb was, what the weight of the aircraft was, etc., because we had a bunch of physicists that were going to try to calculate how, if a body in flight lost its propulsion, what would be the reverse trajectory? In other words, it would fall on a certain trajectory into the water. What would be the reverse trajectory? Because we were trying to find out where was the point of impact if something impacted with this aircraft. Where was it? So we were trying to work all that, but you know what? There wasn't anything on the black box tapes. There were nothing. It was white noise. They were all gone. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Flight 800 came out, turned around, flew, gained its altitude, and I'm not sure. Don't anybody, I don't know if that's the flight path they took, but they come out to get to this VOR and they come across. At the same time that they started coming across down Flight Corridor Betty, a drone Tomahawk missile was launched from the decks of the USS Normandy. Now, this isn't all speculation. This was stuff that we got from non-attributable, anonymous testimony and statements from individuals that were present, that saw that or were part of that didn't want their names used, because if they had their names used, they'd be looking at us all now from behind bars at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. A drone Tomahawk missile was launched. The object was for this drone Tomahawk to fly into the long axis of Tango Billy. The concept was for this drone Tomahawk to be shot at by something. That was the scenario. That was the concept. It was supposed to be shot at by something, and then when it lost its propulsion, it would drop into Tango Billy. The 29 sonar buoys would activate, or wherever that craft entered the water would activate. The Orion flying up above would have monitored and compiled the sonar data and done all the triangulation, and would have radioed a GPS coordinate, a global positioning satellite coordinate, which would have taken them to within about 10 feet, to those two Blackhawks, which are represented by this yellow circle that were flying around outside Tango Billy. They would have then rushed to that spot, terminated at a hover above the water, and the SEALs, all lubed up in dive gear, would have gone into the water, and they would have recovered this Tomahawk missile and brought it back up for a reason. So, there's how the missile played a role. Now, the remote viewers started describing light, a streak of light. They started describing what went on in the cabin and other things, and I'm not going to say much about that because it's macabre and it doesn't serve any purpose. But they just started describing streaks of light, rods of light, shafts of light is how they described it. Now, what was key was us asking them, saying to them, you're on target on this aircraft, because remember, they did not know what they were looking at. They were given just two sets of three numbers. They're not Cartesian, they're not lat long, and they're not grid Mercator. They are two sets of three numbers, randomly assigned numbers, representative of the concept of the target and the matrix of the collective unconscious. That's how you assign the coordinates to these targets. So they had no idea what they were looking at, but they were told that they needed to go backwards in time to perceive an event. Now, that could have been a herd of sheep moving across the ground, just as easily as it could have been TWA Flight 800. Were there probably some of them that knew that they were working 800? Probably, but they never really knew because we were working them on calibration targets. See how we buffer that out of them? If I walk up to them and I say, oh, we've got a target for you to work now, as some people did, got targets for you to work now. Well, they're not stupid. They know they're going to be working TWA Flight 800 targets. So if you ask them to do that and you compile the data of 4 or 5 remote viewers and you don't work them on calibration targets to validate them and accurize them, then what they do is they talk to you about Flight 800, right? And they come up with all kinds of conjecture and speculation and analytical overlay about what brought it down. But if they don't know if they're 2 targets or 3 targets or 5 targets or 10 targets into the calibration process, and all of a sudden they get a TWA Flight 800 target, you see how it fools them? It buffers them. It's a perfect control group. It's a control mechanism so that they don't know what they're looking at. So they can't falsify their data. They can't speculate or be analytical about their data. They just have to report it exactly as they would a training target because they don't know any different about it. Rod of light, shafts of light. That's how they described it. That redirected the entire investigative effort out to start looking at other and different things, to start moving in and around Brookhaven National Labs, because the sketches that were drawn were of the silhouettes of an object with an impact coming from the left side, a cone of light, or a rod of light rather, striking from the left side, not the right side. If you look at the scenario here, Tango Billy, it would have the aircraft moving, Flight 800, moving down this line, this direction. If this drone Tomahawk missile had gone off course and struck the aircraft, it would have been a strike from the right-hand side, the right rear somewhere. It would not have been a strike from the left-hand side. And a drone Tomahawk missile would be like a porpoise, harpooning a whale. It's like, because it didn't have a warhead on it. And they fly slow. Most missiles fly at Mach 1 or Mach 2, killer missiles. And they have several different mechanisms for tracking. One are heat seekers, which traditionally go and find a hot spot on the aircraft, like an engine, and they explode and they rip the engine off and tear the wing in half, and the aircraft spirals and disintegrates. That's how they kill. Or you have the ones that are proximity detonated, that are infrared or radar guided, that come up and then they detonate and throw shafts or rods or other kinds of debris, depending upon who makes the missile. They throw shrapnel into the aircraft and poke holes and shred the skin and cut lines, and they're hot, white hot, and they explode things. That's how they kill. But you had all of these inconsistencies in the missile stuff. So the strike now from the left-hand side, according to the remote viewers. So that puts now the big investigative effort with this former FBI agent who's now working for CBS. He's retired, working for CBS. Me and the producer and all of the other police officers that we were using from the local area that were moving around and asking people things. Sitting in bars, sitting in cafes, moving around out in the lab and doing other things and asking questions about what was going on. Here's what happened. On this particular time, right here at Brookhaven National Labs, there was a weapon being tested. It was a directed energy weapon, a high-powered microwave weapon. It was produced by Phillips Labs, produced 1.4 gigawatts, that's billion watts of power, in a concentrated stream of electrons guided by a self-generated electromagnetic field. Now, that is a concentrated stream of power. That is a rod of light. That is a stream of light. Get the picture? What happened is, as Flight 800 made its turn, came into Betty, and started flying, the Normandy launched the drone. And what happened was the drone went to altitude, and we're not sure, because we could never get anyone inside the control room to talk to us, whether or not the targeting mechanism or the guidance mechanism was an acquire and fire, meaning whether it was radar controlled, looking for a radar bleep, knowing that the drone Tomahawk had been launched, and looking for the drone Tomahawk, because the object was for the Tomahawk to fly on into the long axis of Tango Billy and to be shot at with this high-powered microwave weapon. And when it hits it, it has an electromagnetic pulse effect, which short-circuits out all of the solid-state circuitry, shuts down everything analog, destroys the guidance and control system, shuts it down, kills it. It flies, loses power, and drops on the long axis because if they had missed, they didn't want a drone Tomahawk flying over into here. I mean, it could have hit Plum Island and hurt something, So, it's a joke. It's a joke again. So they had to have it fall into Tango Billy after it was struck, or after it had a certain amount of fuel on it to get it to that point. So remember the Cabot photo? Remember that photo that was on the internet and the other thing? It was called the Cabot photo. Had a Tomahawk missile, nose down, headed for the water. It's another piece of the puzzle. Because it did not get struck by the microwave. If it had been hit by the high-powered microwave, it would have dropped into the water, the SEALs would have gone and recovered it, and they would have pulled it out, and they would have dissected it, because they want to find out, how do we harden the missile against the high-powered microwave EMP effect? And then the other guys building the weapon system want to know, how do we tweak our weapon system so that it kills a hardened craft? I mean, so that it's a shared technology. They're each sharing it, trying to figure out what's going on with it. They're each trying to build something better than the other. But that was the process. And Flight 800 came in, low, slow, and late, and got into what is called the gun target line. Couldn't have been repeated in probably a million years. And that high-powered microwave weapon acquired it as a target, and accidentally, either somebody pushed the button to fire it because the radar indication was that they knew a target had been launched, they knew that they had notified everybody that Betty was active, they knew that there was flight traffic, commercial flight traffic, they were trying to shoot underneath Betty. Who knows, the Tomahawk may have gone high, 800 may have been low underneath Betty. Nobody really knows right now, and we probably won't for a long, long time. But the acquisition acquired the radar bleep, which was Flight 800, and fired 1.4 billion watts of concentrated power into the side center of mass of the aircraft. Now, the flight attendants, according to testimony provided by Suffolk County medical examiners, several of the flight attendants inside the galley, getting ready to serve drinks at that time, were pulled from the water with pieces of the galley fused to their backs. Now, that doesn't come from an explosion. I've seen a lot of them. That doesn't come from an explosion. Not metal fused to tissue like that. Other individuals in the front of the aircraft and in the back of the aircraft were found with oxygen masks on. That meant that the footprint, or the amount of area that the microwave struck, was small enough that it only killed right in that one area. And everybody else died of rapid deceleration injuries when it smacked the water. That's how they died. But the other people died, if it's of any consolation, and it isn't, but if it's any consolation, according to the microwave experts that we talk to, all the PhDs that build them and install them and know about them and maybe don't know a lot about weaponry, but know a lot about microwaves, said that it happened so fast that there wouldn't even have been time for the brain to register pain at all. But it gels the aqueous and vitreous humor of the eyes, it gels the blood, it gels the brain, it basically boils everything in you instantly, just like that. Now, how does that make a plane explode? Well, wad up a ball of aluminum foil, try this at home, put it in your microwave, push 10 seconds, and push start, okay? And stand back. Have no other flammables near it, because it'll spark and pop and burn. I mean, you've all done that, right? You know, stuck Jiffy Pop in or something. You not done that? Never left a fork in the little noodles or something like that, you know, and zapped it and welded it to something in there? Well, I guess that's just me, living alone, you know? I have forks that are in all sorts of contorted shapes and forms and sizes, and knives and other things that have been microwaved by me by accident. That's how I discovered it, you know? So that's what, if you want to really see, you can do that. I mean, you can do that. It won't hurt anything, really, I don't think, will it? Just pop and you'll see it, though, what happens to it. Now, those kinds of burns, which kind of just open from the inside, they don't really burn all around the outside. They just open up holes because the metal just fluoresces and becomes very active and just pulls apart as it's heated by this energy. And the patterns on the aircraft matched that kind of burn pattern, that kind of technology. It matched it. There weren't Spalding holes, there were multiple holes in this thing that were burned like that. And that would have caused the fuel tanks to explode. And so you would have had the ball of fire coming down out of the sky and then crashing into the water. Now, why did we cover that up? I mean, if it had been a missile that brought it down, would we have covered it up? Probably not. We'd have probably turned around and said, look, we fired a missile and it was a big mistake and it, accidentally struck an aircraft and we're very sorry and we will pay for all the damages and, pay off all the family members, the surviving family members, and that would have been it. I mean, one would assume anyway. Maybe. However, May 13th, 1993, Les Aspin, the Secretary of Defense for the brand new, or fairly new, Clinton administration, stood up and told all the American people, we are at, I quote, we are at the end of the Star Wars era. Now, what does that mean? What that means is he's telling the American people who, now whether you're an advocate of Star Wars or not, doesn't matter. He was telling the American people and the rest of the world that we are no longer pursuing the Strategic Defense Initiative. Roughly translated, we are no longer pursuing the endeavor to put weapons platforms in orbit around our planet. We're not going to do that anymore. That's what they're telling us. So, a weapon being built and tested in support of the SDI, the Strategic Defense, it's getting late, it's tough to say that, the Strategic Defense Initiative takes a civilian airliner down. When? What was critical about this? What's critical about this equation right now? Think. 4 months before the presidential elections. 4 months. And so once you cover it up and tell the lie, then you have to sustain the lie, don't you? And so that's why you'll never know the truth about it, except now you do. And if you remote view it, as remote viewers, you'll know the truth about it as well, because you'll see the rod of light traveling at the speed of light that struck that aircraft and brought it down. Now, the story's not over. We pulled a 35-page report together, photographs of the weapon. You want to know something? You can find a photograph of the weapon on the internet. Just start looking up high-powered microwave weapons. And you want to know something else? Phillips Labs broadcasted, and I don't think they've taken it off yet, their entire research and testing program. When they were going to put the platform in space, when they were going to do the first missile test, which happened to be, oops, right at that time, and when they were going to continue to do everything that they were going to continue to do to put a killer satellite in space that had the ability, and this is what you have to understand, not only kill intercontinental ballistic missiles in the post-boost or boost phase, but to aim down like this laser and shoot at whatever they want to shoot at on the ground. And of course, in this audience, there are also people saying, yes, but they can turn them outwards and they can shoot them at, intergalactic things coming at us from outer space. Well, I don't know that we're building anything that could beat what they have, but maybe that's the case. It may be the case. It may serve all purposes in that respect. But nonetheless, weapons platforms in space make people nervous because it takes warfare now into a fourth dimension. It takes warfare into a fourth dimension. And there is a race for orbital patterns in space. How many satellites do you think we have up there? Thousands. Thousands of satellites. It's getting really crowded. And you know that there are people that are actually, that people own space. They own it. And you got to buy in to be in their orbit. You got to buy, you got to have the money to get it in there. And of course, NASA owns the predominance of it. And then there are others like the Soviets and so on and so on. To put up a satellite, you got to buy into real estate in space. Really a bizarre world, isn't it? Kind of cool to be part of it, though, bizarre as it is. So, I don't know, not very, like an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, something like that. The question was, because the question was for the video, how late was Flight 800? I think it was 30 minutes to an hour. My memory may fail me on that. But you can see that weapon system. And the reason that the weapons are not there now is because they cannot miniaturize the power generation platforms yet. They can't get enough power in a small enough package to put it up there yet. But they're working on it, and they're very, very close to it. This takes you into a whole new realm of weaponry now, high-powered microwave, because this now goes into the realm of Soviet MEG mapping and all this other stuff. Had occasion to go to the Twin Bridge Marriott, or Key Bridge Marriott, at the turn of the decade, where the CIA was working with some Soviet scientists who had come over, and we're working with a MEG map, a microelectroencephalography mapping, which was to now replace the modern-day polygraph, or was to become the modern-day polygraph, equating the old polygraph system to a medieval dunking booth. Because the idea was to be able to map the frequencies of the human mind, okay, your brain as it functions. If you lie, there's an electrochemical response and there's a frequency given off, and they can measure that frequency. If you lie, you can't fake that frequency, at least not right now. More evolved, we may be able to, but not right now. But you can fake it on a polygraph machine. In fact, we send our operatives and agents to school to learn how to beat polygraph machines. And then we're so stupid because we bring them back in and then we make them do counterintelligence polygraphs. Have you divulged any classified information? Nope. You know? Guy's living with an East German national, been living with her for like 6 years. She's typing out his ops reports. Nope, never. No, I've never told anybody anything bad. You know? So, because we send him to school to beat it. You know? So you can beat a polygraph machine, but you can't beat the MEG map. Now, what's the more sinister application of the MEG map? If you can chemically induce a heart attack, you can map that frequency. And now you capture that frequency. And now you can turn around and rebroadcast that frequency, and its sympathetic resonance takes place, which means that now you can override the real low-level frequencies in the brain and you can induce a heart attack. They've done it. It's right along the same lines as remote influencing, which one of my other colleagues talked about, that they were doing in the remote viewing unit. Now, they'll all stand up and say, no, they weren't. Remember what I told you. Who is it that's saying it? What is their motive for disguising it? Understand that if we have the ability to reach out and passively gather information, don't think for a minute that if we think we can turn around and actively influence something, that we will not develop that technology. And they are working on it. They are trying to get it done. If they can reach out and manipulate or skew your thought processes, or if they can reach out and kill with it, they will. And they will work toward that end. As fast as they can do it, they will work toward that end. So now you've got a weapon system. Does anybody here read Armed Forces Journal International? You should, if you don't. And Defense News and other things, you should read those things. You're truth seekers, remember? Read those things because they are professional journals within that community. So they seldom lie to each other. Okay? They have a weapon system now. It was great. I loved it. Does everybody remember Arnold Schwarzenegger and what was that, Total Recall thing? He had that thing shoved up his nose, you know, and these guys were tracking him with that thing, you know? Well, on the pages of Armed Forces Journal International about a year ago, they had a Special Operations Convention. I used to read it because I was a Special Operations officer. And they had an MP5 submachine gun, and on that thing, on that submachine gun, was a little box mounted. And this little box was used for building clearing operations, room clearing. It meant that they could come into a building and look at the box, and the box would tell them whether a human being was in that building, and it would give them 10-meter increments out and back, whether the human being was out in front of them or behind them, and it would tell them whether it was above them or below them. Not this virtual thing like they had in Total Recall. Yeah, they're working on that part. But it could tell them where they were. Do you know what it tracked? What do you think it tracked? The frequency of the human heart. Because if that frequency stopped, there was no need to clear the room, right? Frequency of the human heart. Every time it beat, it gives off an electro signal, and they could track it. And here's the interesting thing. Who out here has had an EKG? Well, you now have a fingerprint because yours is different than mine. And they can tweak in your EKG, your frequencies, and then they can find you in the building instead of me. Hopefully, you instead of me. So, Whole new world of weaponry. And you guys talk about, we're talking about, remember I told you about the turnings that we're going in. Remember the seculum and the secula? How we're moving in the unraveling phase right now, moving into the destructive phase. And when we go into the destructive phase, then we'll be faced with some sort of catastrophic event, which has for the last 1,800 years been warfare on an ever-increasing scale of lethality and precision. So what we're working on are population control weapons. And that doesn't mean birth control. Population control weapons. MEGMAP, right? High-powered microwave weapons being tested, down in satellites, killer satellites, taking planes out of the sky. The whole idea now is to be able to have large power generation capabilities and to generate a frequency and broadcast it up to a reflector satellite. What was just happening 2 weeks ago? What were the Russians just testing 2 weeks ago? What were they testing 2 weeks ago? Come on, watch the world. Be in love and watch the world, remember? What were they testing? Reflector satellites. They were going to reflect the rays of the sun to illuminate dark spots on the earth, cities. And nobody gets it, you know? It's amazing. Everybody thinks like, oh, good, power, you know? They're going to grow more food with it. There you go. You can get a grow light, you know, somewhere at the hardware store. But, I mean, I'm just making fun of that. But understand that everything's a two-edged sword. Sure, there's probably somebody that does want to grow more food with it. There's also somebody that says, yeah, but I can also beam a microwave down that'll put everybody in the area down. I'll fry them, not burn them, not kill them, but they can use population control. Look at the world, what's happening. What does FEMA have now as an executive order that allows them to do what? FEMA can do what? Declare martial law. You have an executive order that allows them to do that now. So now, I'm painting a really ugly picture here for you. Painting an ugly picture because I'm telling you we're in the unraveling phase. But I'm still kind of smiling, aren't I? Because we have tricks up our sleeve. We have ability to change things. This isn't gloom and doom. I'm not telling you this stuff so that we can all go and not sleep too well tonight. Understand this is a reality we've created for ourselves as a species. We've created this for ourselves. We can change it. We can change it. You have this ability to change this. You are gods and goddesses. You have the ability to do it. I know it. I've seen it. I know what you can do. I'm not up here preaching to you so that you can join the church of RVT. You know? I'm up here telling you, you have a powerful, wonderful gift inside each of you. And that is the ability to join together and to create change. Not by protesting and beating up, and re-electing and doing all that kind. You're going to have to do that anyway. That's just part of, normal everyday human life. Voice your opinions in that way, but also voice yourself spiritually. And understand, as we said the first time I spoke to you, that we have the ability to change the nature of matter simply by looking at it. It's been proven in laboratory experiments that we can do that. The power of the human mind. That's infinitesimal compared to what we're talking about changing here. But we can change the nature of matter. We can change quantum particles and move them by thinking about them. If you have that ability to do those things, that's expressing the power of the human mind in a very positive way to influence the fundamental building blocks of this universe, of all creation for that matter. And if you can do that as one human being, what can we do as 500, as 5,000, 50,000, 5 million? What can we do? I'll tell you what you can do. You'll change the outcome of human destiny. And I swear to you, you can do that. But not if we step back and accept that as our inevitable path and dig deeper holes and build bigger guns and build more hatred and build more on the nature of war and only change the way in which wars are fought. We will, if we do not expand this pure awareness, expand conscious awareness, and change this outcome, or affect a change in the outcome, there is a very distinct possibility that somewhere down the road, none of us are going to see it, somewhere down the road we could stop existing as a species. Or there may only be survivors, those who dug deeper holes. Now, think about that for a minute while I just tell you about what happened for TWA. We brought this information in and stood there with the producer to the executives of CBS at 555 West 57th Street in Manhattan, New York, and said, this is what we found out. We were proud as hell. This is what we found out. And we want, the funding to go back in and do the rest of the investigation and pull all of this stuff together and do a documentary on this and tell the people of the world what happened to TWA Flight 800, because we think it really was bad. And they said, nah, I ain't going to do that story. Who owns CBS? What is Phillips a subsidiary of? Bingo! We should all go get $1 somewhere. It is a subsidiary. Okay, it was sold off and it's a foreign corporation now, but it's all one and the same. Okay? You're not going to do that story. Well, this young, wonderful girl, this producer, runs and says, this is not going to happen. She runs to Washington, D.C., to the headquarters of CBS and says, look, we have got to bring truth to the people. This is the story, and we want to do this story. He said, nah, you didn't listen. You're not going to do this story. She came back. 3 days later, the FBI raided her office. Took every shred of documentary film and interview tapes and everything that we had compiled over 6 months. Gone. All boxed up and carted out neatly. CBS fired her 5 days later. Now works in Los Angeles. 5 days later, they fired her. A 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer. They fired her. Without explanation, you're out of here. Then, everyone involved was subpoenaed by the FBI. Come in and tell who they talked to, who divulged this piece of information, who divulged that piece of information, who did this, who did that. Now, for a long time, the FBI agent disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. I don't know if he's back yet or not. I think he just went to ground to let things blow over for a while. But now you know the whole story about where remote viewing played a role and where this investigation took us about what happened to TWA Flight 800. Now, what happened with disinformation in all of this? Well, you know the obvious stuff, right? But look at how clever we are. What a science and an art we've turned this into. Who was a guy that stood up, a very credible man, Pierre Salinger, who was credible, stood up and said, a missile, it was a missile, it was a missile, it was a missile. Because we went over to somebody and we said to somebody in the French intelligence service, have somebody tell Salinger it was a missile, and that they know it was a missile because they saw it on satellite imagery. French intelligence service has somebody go approach Salinger and say it was a missile. We got it on satellite imagery. Salinger stakes his reputation on what he was told, doesn't he? And why do they do that? Because every one of us turned our heads to the missile theory. And that gave them ample opportunity to cover, disguise, to do whatever they wanted to do with the real weapon system and everything involved with it that took Flight 800 out of the air. And that is disinformation. We have organizations that pay people like us to sit there and craft those kinds of lies. And we execute them every day in our government and other governments around the world every day, which is why being a truth seeker is probably one of the most dangerous, yes, and heroic things that you will be rewarded for one day. That I promise. And you should look in the mirror every morning and be proud of yourself for what you're doing. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Be proud of yourself for being truth seekers. Because the truth is what will change the world. The pursuit of the truth, the pursuit of wisdom is what will change the world. And nothing else. They want you to be afraid. They want you to think that they are all powerful and all controlling and own it all. But I would rather die in a ditch in the pursuit of truth than to live the lie that they want you to live. So don't ever live it. Now, I have one final slide. Oh, one good finish to this. Remember, Les Aspin said we are at the end of the Star Wars era, right? National Review this month. The SDI imperative. Clinton administration just gave $7 billion to the SDI initiative. There's not a word in here about kickstarting the program again. It's because it has existed all this time. They've been building them after they told us they weren't. So you should read things like that. Okay, let's take some questions. Questions, Mike? We'll take questions for just a few more minutes, and then we'll end this thing.
Hello.
Hello.
With all the information you've given us, I applaud your optimism. As a person who sometimes likes to escape the reality of these harsh subjects, I enjoy a lot of movies. However, some movies remind us of what's going on, even ones that were made quite some time ago, regarding the very subject you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'd like to recommend two for the audience if they're interested in the specifics of this technology and this story. The first one came out approximately 14 years ago. Actually, it would be the second. It's actually a comedy starring Val Kilmer called Real Genius. Some of you may have heard of it. It deals with similar technologies from space. And it's a comedy. It's cute. It's fun. And then twice that period of time, 28 years ago, in 1971, there was a little James Bond film called Diamonds Are Forever. And you may recall the plot involving some sort of, futuristic satellite dish that was built in space by, the evil villains, and it can literally zap anybody or anything from space. So just two little films to recommend. Thank you.
That was an ad, not a question. That's okay.
I'm having fun at this conference. How about you? David Morehouse for president.
Yes. But I don't wear boxers.
Flight 800 was so confusing when it happened that I didn't pay an awful lot of attention to it. But I've been a remote viewer since I was that high. Not your type, of course, untrained, but I see things. I have a screen up here, and if I put out a question, the screen lights up. So I asked about Flight 800, and the first answer that I got was that something had caused the oxygen system to ignite. Now, oxygen doesn't burn, but anything around it does, burns intensely. But I wasn't entirely happy about that. So I looked a little bit further, and I do lectures on quite a variety of weird subjects, and one of my lectures is called Synchronicity, the Magic of Coincidence. So I put it into my screen, give me a coincidence. And the answer was that a short while before that, a civilian aircraft had been shot down over the Gulf by a missile fired by an American destroyer. So I thought maybe that was the answer, and then I really got stuck on that. But that was I did carry it on a little bit more than that. Well, okay, the question is, the question was that would that be possible? But you've actually answered it already, because you said that you told the story about it.
Yeah.
But I was just putting out a different attitude of the way that sort of thing
I
can
understand,
happen.
and I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Question about radio, high voltage radio beam weapons and testing.
Yeah.
As your remote viewing team that you were with, did you ever have any remote viewing of HARP type projects? And does this, as some people allege, cause weather problems and, you know, putting holes in the atmosphere and this kind of thing? I'm concerned about the environment, the effects overall for the planet and the weather.
That's a good question. There has been some remote viewing done on it, but there's not good evidence to support any kind of a definitive statement about it. What I can say to you is that I can tell you personal opinion about it, and that's it, is that I know for a fact that weather control is an issue that the agency is very much interested in. Why would they be interested in that? Because if you can control or manipulate the weather in any way, it's not an accidental thing to be able to manipulate weather. It's a purposeful thing. If you can manipulate weather patterns, what can you do? You can starve nations. You can bring them to their knees. That's the object of that. So it's not an accidental thing caused by HARP or anything else. It's a very purposeful design program to be capable of doing that. There are some very insidious things being developed, you know, and it's all being developed in preparation for this fourth turning that I talked to you about. I mean, they know that it's going to be bad. And so they, being the status quo, are preparing to be capable of manipulating and controlling populations. And that takes on a multitude, multidimensional concept of answers and programs and plans being put into place that are very sinister. And call it optimism. For me, it's not optimism. It is understanding the reverence and the eagerness of the truth that you can change it. I refuse to accept that it cannot be changed. And I refuse to accept that that's my inevitable path. It is not. And it never has been. It is just that there are not enough of you out there right now. You know, critical mass to change something like this is about, I think I told you before, 11%, somebody once said. Well, 6.5 billion people, or 5.6 billion people, whatever it is, I forget, doing the math roughly, that's about 600 million people that need to be focused in pure awareness in changing this and making that direction happen. And it will occur then. Well, the population of the Catholic Church is 1 billion now. So if they can do it, so can you. Okay? If they can do it, so can you. Yeah.
Thank you.
David, you mentioned FEMA now has a mandate to basically take over. Do you have any information, or has any remote viewing been done on whether or not there is a plan afoot to use Y2K as a catalyst for such a takeover?
No. I mean, again, this is opinion, okay? Because there hasn't been any remote viewing done about that. And again, remote viewing is a process, not an event. It's not an event. So whenever somebody steps up to you and says, oh yeah, well, we remote viewed that last week, and you know, this was our finding, be skeptical of that, okay? Be guarded of that. Remote viewing is a process. There has to be a model in place. Everyone has to be calibrated. You have to understand what they are doing, what their accuracies are, and then You work them on the targets blind, and then you bring in empirical data that you can calculate what the outcome of something is going to be, or what the evidence of something is. It cannot be just a experiential thing. Now, that does not mean that many of us out here don't get perceptions about things, that we're not clairvoyant, that we don't feel or intuit or see or have visions or hear words or form sentences about what's going to happen. It just means that if the issue is putting together a scientific process to measure accurately what we think is going to happen, it has to be done in consonance with other methodologies, not just a standalone endeavor. It cannot ever be trusted as a standalone endeavor because it is not that accurate. It is only a piece of the puzzle. So don't ever bet the ranch on just what a remote viewer pulls out. Okay?
I have one other very quick one. Ingo Swann did some remote viewing on the moon that he talked about. I'm wondering if you could verify any of that or if you have any feelings
I have
about
no
it.
idea. I have no idea.
Yeah, there's been one real hot issue, in fact, a couple of hot issues around the world and nation. I've also wondered about our POWs, MIAs from World War II on up to present time, and also Princess Grace and Princess Diana. I feel we're tied in together, because both these ladies were killed in car crashes. And
Yeah.
no, I don't know whether you could maybe tell us about either one of these things, like the POW MIAs or Princess Diana.
I can tell you, I'll never lie to you. I don't know of anybody that's done anything, at least not in my group, has done anything for Princess Di or Princess Grace or anything like that. There has been, what was the first part? I'm sorry, it escaped me.
Wait, POW.
MIA and POW, yeah. Thank you. There has been a lot of work done for that, not in my group, but we even did that in the unit. There was work done there in the unit. The problem with doing that is that it's a moving target, and it's an old target, and it's moving, and it's one of the conditions of what we do is to say, like when a police department comes to us and says, will you work this case, we'll say, how old is the case? If it's like 5 years old, the answer is no. Because what will happen is, because remote viewing is not an exact science, and you're not going to be able to go and say, this is the spot where the body is, you just can't do that for the most part. You can stand like I did in that video and say, well, it's out here somewhere. But then you are faced with the same problem the police department is faced with, is what now they look at it becomes an issue of economics. Are we going to drain the lake, drag the lake, bring in seismic equipment, spend $500,000 out of a police force budget, a city budget to look for somebody that's been gone for 5 years? The answer will be no. So don't waste the valuable time in the remote viewing effort to go look for something like that. It's a process, not an event. It takes a long time to work it out. So yes, there was work done on POWs and MIAs. I do not know what the result of that was. It was all turned back into DIA, which farmed it back out to all of the different customers. Now, there are a number of other people that have approached us and asked us to do that, but because it's a moving target, you can expend very valuable resources looking for something that's moved constantly or may not even be alive anymore. So the best thing we can do when someone asks us is to say, is it alive, or is it, is the target alive, or is it dead, or, what might the condition be? Okay? And then you have to have that model in place, remember, because there is no feedback. It doesn't matter that you waltz out and say, I saw the person and they were alive and hoeing sugar cane in a valley somewhere. What does that mean? Okay, it doesn't mean anything unless I can validate that you're running around 60, 70, 80% right on training targets. Then I can say that what you saw about this valley is probably correct within 60 to 70, 80%. And then 5 or 10 or 20 other remote viewers collaborate that or corroborate that, then I can use it. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, David. I'd like to be recruited into your unit. Okay. You mentioned some remote viewers had specialized abilities. I'm not sure, but did you work with Joe McMonigal?
Joe McMonigal came, was in the unit long before I was in the unit.
Did you
He
get to
came and went long before I went.
So he was gone already when you joined?
Yeah.
Okay. What would be your specialized ability Some of the other fellows had specialized to be able to travel through time or pick up objects, people. Do you have a particular specialty, or is that top secret, or?
No, that's not top secret. I don't have anything that's top secret.
Besides
I'm not
looking
mean. I was probably just about average across the board. I mean, I didn't really have any unique abilities. I was like just average, you know. I was an average viewer. I learned it fast, and I had a good product, but I'd never make the claim that I was the biggest and the best and the greatest. I was about average, and I could come up with good. The things I liked, because I like building stuff, is I'm good at structure. You know, I'm good at identifying buildings and what the exterior buildings and what they look like. And in extended remote viewing, I'm good at flying. You know, I'm good at moving around the target and seeing it and going inside and drawing the detail of the interiors and things like that, and like a desk and where people are sitting. I'm not good at getting inside people's heads like that, and I'm not.
Do you think that we'll ever match the abilities of Pat Price, who was able to get
Sure.
information from computer disk, and he had a very high straight average, like you mentioned, sometimes it peaks up and low, but he had a pretty good straight
Everybody, peaks and goes up and down, goes up and down. Everybody does. The unfortunate thing is about the historical evidences of guys in the unit and girls in the unit is that we only broadcast the really good stuff. Nobody ever talks about their dismal failures. Everybody stands up and talks about how good they were and what the great successes that they had were. So, I'm going to tell you again, the remote viewers that are being trained now are twice as good as any of us ever were. I mean, they're just better, You're just better now because you have the benefit of that morphic resonance of all the rest of us. We were struggling along learning this stuff. You guys know everything we know before you even start into the process. Believe in that 100th monkey effect thing. It's true. It's all there in the collective unconscious. You have the benefit of everybody who has come before you. It's part of the ritual, part of the structure. You have it. So you're better than we ever were. I don't care what any of them say. You're better than any of us ever were. I've seen the results of what students do now. I mean, they just kick us in the rump. I mean, we were kindergarten compared to where students are now. We really were.
Okay, just one more little thing.
Shoot him.
When you mentioned remote influencing, you could remote influence, but not in a negative way. Like I
Who
think,
said that?
Well, I think that myself, including myself, but I know others as well, where you can communicate. You can't communicate with others through remote influencing, remote communicating, right? You can get information. Is that possible? Have you done that?
Yeah, you can share information. You can sense other beings. You can glean subtle data from another person's mind. You can do all of that stuff. And ultimately, when they learn the protocols, you'll be able to reach out. They will be able to reach out if that's what they're doing, and affect some sort of damage. If nothing else, just to bring about stupor or indecisiveness.
Dave.
Like me.
Dave, since you've been career military, why in the name of sanity would our government and the military test a weapon such as you instructed us in the area of the densest population in this country? Isn't there other space that they could have done this?
That's one of the biggest areas for missile testing in all of America.
Why?
Because it's naval. It's all naval weapons testing. Patuxent Naval Station, all of that stuff along the East Coast, and that whole triangle right there is where the vast majority of naval weapons are being built. And God, don't ask, for there to be reason and sanity to that. These guys think, 35 miles out to sea, they don't care. To them, it's a safe thing. What's any different about that in China Lake or White Sands? Next to Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and everything to the south and everything to the west. I mean, a missile goes off, a missile goes off. There isn't any safe place. You're talking about missiles that fly Mach 1, Mach 2, 500, 600, 700 miles away. I mean, that's not a reason for them not to have done it. And they do it all over the East Coast, particularly in that triangle area there.
Is it just the influence of Brookhaven?
No, it's Patuxent. It's which is right there in Maryland, and then you go up to Virginia to, help me out, Virginia Beach, which is Norfolk, thank you. I mean, it's all over there. I mean, you can't walk around this country very far without tripping over a military installation somewhere, despite how many they're closing down. They're still all over the place, and high-tech weapons testing is everywhere.
And there's nothing that we can do about drawing this kind of weaponry away from the major population areas of this country?
Well, that wouldn't be my worry. My worry would be trying to change the soul and trying to change the intent of humanity so that they didn't want to use the weaponry or did not use the weaponry. I wouldn't be worried about, moving test sites to one place or another place. I mean, that may be your pursuit, and I wish you well, but you better run for Congress and have some teammates, because otherwise you're probably not going to change it. I mean, those facilities have been in existence for a long time, and they're going to test weapons there. They test them. Take a look at, around where all the test sites are. Look at any map and look at all the different test sites throughout the U.S. and the world.
Well, I'm sure if all those local people knew what was going on, they could be activated. This is the kind of thing, I don't live in New York, but any New Yorkers here, you should put it out there.
Yeah, that's a very valid comment. I mean, it's your concern is valid, but the valid comment also is most of them that live in those areas work there, so they don't want it changed. Yes, sir.
Yeah, before I ask my question, I have to emphasize the fact that what I'm going to say is I heard strictly as a rumor, so I hope nobody in the audience takes this as fact. Okay, the rumor is, and I read this in various underground literature and also on radio talk shows, that the reason Flight 800 was brought down, regardless of how it was brought down, is because on board were 20 to 30 French scientists and technicians that were involved in the nuclear testing in Micronesia previously. So I'd like to hear your comment on that, or whether you've heard that rumor.
Well, if I've heard the rumor, and I've heard lots of other rumors, and I chalk them up to rumors. I mean, I remember what I told you about the reverence of truth. You can chase your tail with every conspiracy theory out there surrounding that thing. So the facts are what I told you. And then, whatever else is out there, then you have to respect the reverence or pursue the reverence of that truth, not just the eagerness of it, not looking for something else out there. Look for it as a truth seeker, but stack them all up and weigh them all very carefully and consider the sources and consider the impact and consider the motives, and are they really valid, and would something like that happen? But, I mean, there are probably 27 other conspiracy theories surrounding the downing of that aircraft and why they wanted to kill it. I would prefer to, not because I'm stupid, but because based on what I know and the facts and the reverence of the facts tell me that it was an accident. We didn't mean to bring it down. We sure as hell meant to cover it up. But we didn't mean to bring an aircraft down and kill 234 people. We just didn't mean to do that.
Well, concerning this rumor, the main there were some differences going way back to the 50s, because the French had their own nuclear
I know.
program, and then the NATO did. And since France has been in and out of NATO over the years, there were some hard feelings towards that, and the hard feelings continue to this day.
I know, and I'm not discrediting it. I don't mean to cut you short on that, but I mean we could go back to the beginning of time and figure out why we would have wanted to bring down 800. I mean, it is, we owe the UN lots of money too, and
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier on the difficulty and the expense involved in, say, finding a dead body.
Right.
I'm wondering if the GPS satellite system could not be used very effectively for that purpose, or has it been used?
Well, we're talking about, let's say we have a murder victim or a suspected murder victim or a missing person. If that person has been gone for a long time, the body's probably been buried, or it's decayed, or it's nothing left but skeletal remains. And so the issue then becomes with the police department. What are we going to do? Unless it's on the surface of the ground, there's nothing they can do with it. That'll be the last question, and then I'll end.
But if you
The
give
next
the
one behind it.
exact location, isn't it worth...
But you can't GPS as a remote viewer. You see, as a remote viewer, you're walking out and going, this is the area that we feel that the body is in, given the topography, matching the geographical terrain and doing the other things. This is where we feel it is. But that doesn't help the police departments. They then go, if it's an old case, they have to make a determination, are they going to spend the money to go look for this thing, using the seismic stuff and things.
Has any remote viewer tried to use the GPS system to findings?
It doesn't work in that way. It would not work.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question. It's very sweet of you.
Hi, I actually do have a question. I do.
Weren't you up here before?
Very good. As a member of this tribe of truth seekers, I think I've learned, as a lot of people have learned, and you just used the word accident. I'm becoming less and less convinced that there are accidents, and this is a significant case. And I think it might be worth pursuing some more. And, conspiracy theories have been proposed. That flight did have a passenger list. Can we look at that list and see if there were some very interesting people on board? And can we pursue that?
There's, out of 234 people, there's always interesting people on board. As far as I'm concerned,
well, why not? Let's go for it.
The mother that's there with, the 3-year-old child is an interesting person. And I'm not just being ridiculous about that. I mean, there are always important and interesting people on board an aircraft.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, but, I'm sure there are. But again, the reverence of truth. I mean, yes, we could spend a lot more time looking at it. Yeah, absolutely we could. But rather than looking at that, because that's over now, and I think that the critical element in all of this is not that 234 people died, but, that's tragic. But what we have to spend our time on doing now is changing the mindset and the spirit in our government and other things that allows it to be covered up to protect a president because we don't want to, deface him or cause him to lose faith. That's more important than looking at and trying to figure out, was there somebody on board the aircraft that we think they might have wanted to take out. I'd rather spend the time looking at degenerative diseases in humanity that have reached epidemic proportions and see what we can do to fix those. I'd rather spend the time looking at AIDS. I'd rather spend the time looking at cures for cancer. I'd rather spend the time looking for missing children. All of those kinds of things, rather than taking a company and the assets of a company and turning around and trying to figure out, did we kill Flight 800 because somebody on board, was involved in some nuclear thing somewhere 10 years ago or 15 or even 5 or whatever it might have been. That's not the most significant aspect of that to me. I apologize if it offends or that if it is to you. I'm just giving my honest answer. That's not the most important thing to me.
Well, it was just the subject we dealt with tonight.
Yeah.
I agree with you. There is a lot of work to be done everywhere.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good concern. Yes. One last, I promise.
Can you teach us as a group a course in how to do ethical remote influencing?
Yeah. I have to think about that one for a while. Good night, and thank you for being here. Thank you.